Thanks so much for the invitation. It's great to be here. We actually just came from the facility at Hartley Street and Spence Street, the Ergon facility, where a purpose-built test facility is being established, and it's one of the best in the country. So, and is able to test all sorts of new technology, including technology that will facilitate the proliferation of renewables. So you are at the forefront here in Cairns of what's going on in the sector. So I look after the infrastructure and utility services part of Yurika, and Yurika is part of the Energy Queensland group. And it's good to have former colleague in the room, Jeff Bowes. So hello, Jeff. So Energy Queensland, as you know, or probably know, is the distribution entity for Queensland. Inside the group is also the Ergon Retail and the newly formed business Yurika, which is the business that looks after the contestable services that Energy Queensland provides. You'll see on the left-hand side some of the stats, and probably for the Energy Queensland group, and probably the stat that I want you to focus on for this particular presentation is the 7,500 staff, because part of the message today for us is about how we're trying to evolve our own workforce and make our own workforce sustainable through the energy transition. Yurika's mandate, and again, alignment with what you're talking about today. We have our own challenges within the Energy Queensland group in terms of a workforce that needs to support the infrastructure that is around the state and keeps the lights on. And what is often an overlooked need for Energy Queensland is to make sure that we have a very substantial regional workforce, not only to keep the lights on day to day and ensure reliable and safe energy supply, but also to respond to natural disasters. The energy system is going through a transition, and that transition is having its impacts on the distribution and transmission businesses around the country, including a reduction in the sorts of traditional revenues and business size and envelope of these businesses. They are shrinking in terms of their traditional services that they provide. But the challenge unique to Energy Queensland and probably Western Australia is that we are very committed to a regional workforce and making sure we've got a workforce that is able to respond to cyclone events and other major weather events. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that the workforce is sustainable as our revenues and our other activities diminish across as we move through the energy transition. So some of the things that Yurika is looking at is, none of it would be certainly news to the people in this room, but are all the things that you would expect us to be looking at, and they include the things that are on that list. There are various things that we are more advanced with than others, and I'm going to give you just a very quick snapshot of some of those shortly by way of some pictures and some quick commentary. But we have all of those things in our roadmap in terms of where we see ourselves playing as the Energy Queensland Group and Yurika specifically to take our business forward, to make sure that we're developing regional communities through the support of the energy transition for business, ensuring the transition of our own workforce, and ensuring the decarbonisation of the economy and supporting that process. I'll just let Patrick tell you a bit about QIC.
Thanks, Peter. Hi, everyone. So QIC is where I'm from. So we're a state-owned fund manager. I sit in the infrastructure business of QIC. So across the entire of our business, we manage over $80 billion of capital that's invested in the infrastructure team. That's about $14 billion invested across 19 direct investments. And so we look at investments in the energy side, utilities and transportation. And so look, our team is about 50 people. Clearly we're looking at sort of new investment opportunities, and we work very closely with the management teams of the businesses I invest in and the team. And maybe the next slide just gives a bit of a snapshot in terms of some numbers and pictures of some of the assets. But maybe two probably themes that seem to come across from the really interesting presentations earlier today, which seem relevant for this, is probably, I'd say, alignment is such a key point, as well as partnership seem to come across in a lot of what has been discussed today. And on the alignment side, important to us is that our capital that we invest it's in some part, it's the state of Queensland capital that's invested for the long run. It's also superannuation and pension money, which is invested over 20 and 30-year time horizons. So very long-term, long duration capital. And so that means for us, sustainability is really critical to all of our investments, because you can't have an investment over 20 or 30 years without a clear mandate and a strategy around sustainability. And for us, sustainability is really a balancing of all the objectives that sit around quite a privileged asset class on the infrastructure side in terms of local communities, in terms of the environment, in terms of political interests in the local community, as well as workforces and teams within the businesses themselves. So we would say that alignment is absolutely fundamental, and sustainability sits pretty firmly entrenched when you're investing over such a long time period. And probably the next point around alignment is probably why I'm here standing and talking with Peter, is as we look at the investments in some of our businesses, we try to work out where there are ways we can partner with some of the state-owned businesses themselves, and really unlock, I suppose, quite a vast, and there's some sums presented earlier, quite vast sums of capital to invest in the infrastructure opportunities. So a couple of the businesses that we've invested in the last 12 months, one of them is based in Cairns actually, Swift as a remote freight transport company on the marine side, but also Pacific Energy based in Western Australia, where their core service has been to build remote power stations for mine sites, for remote communities, and actually working in very small pilot projects as well, in hydrogen and renewables, as really off-grid power sort of specialists. So you can see with some of those expertise within our businesses, alignment is such an important thing for us to consider in terms of investment, which is why there's a presentation with ourselves as well as Yurika today.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Just a whistle-stop tour of some of the things Yurika's up to. Large-scale renewables. I was in southern New South Wales last week with our Executive General Manager touring some of these sites. We're involved with quite a few large-scale renewable projects, specifically the connection between the solar PV and the network, and we're doing those all over Australia. We've got 2 connections underway in northern Victoria, 3 in southern New South Wales, as well as a number in Queensland at the moment. So we're certainly facilitating and bringing our network expertise to bear on the proliferation of renewables onto the network. That's just a sample of some of the projects we're involved with. In terms of storage will play a role in the energy transition, as has often been spoken about, and we've got a project at Bowley that's underway with some Tesla kit for a battery there. We're basically this is the first of many for both Energy Queensland and commercially that we will partner with our partners in the market for and deploy. And so storage will be a big thing going forward. I don't know whether anybody in the room is familiar with this problem called minimum demand, but it's certainly going to be an issue going forward where things like storage and synchronous condensers and those sorts of things will be required to support renewables as they hit the network to ensure that the network remains stable. So a big part of the energy transition. We're also doing a lot of stuff behind the meter. These are reasonably contemporary shots of solar installations on the Domain Shopping Centre in Townsville actually. So we're doing quite a few commercial and industrial solar and battery installations, particularly for shopping centres at the moment in Victoria and Queensland. Isolated communities, certainly very topical here. Yurika is involved in the decarbonisation of the remote communities that Ergon support in particular, with its 33 remote sites, and Yurika's been involved with a number of projects to install storage and solar PV in those communities. And we're actually going to take those learnings and develop more of that, and take also those learnings out into the commercial market. One thing that Cairns used to be our northernmost site on the EV superhighway, so it's now Port Douglas. After that site will be commissioned in the next few weeks. But through an investment by Yurika and by Transport and Main Roads, and I've seen you had Matty Yong, I think, on the run sheet. Matt was instrumental in that with Transport and Main Roads, but we made an investment in the EV superhighway, which was effectively a concept of 50 kilowatt charging stations for EVs all the way from the Gold Coast airport all the way to Cairns, with no greater than about 170 kilometre distance in between the charging stations, which allowed an EV owner to, with confidence, travel from one end of the state to the other and ensure that they could charge. That was conceptually what it was about. Essentially what it was about was seeding the market and providing the market with confidence that EVs were something that you could have anywhere in the state, and in fact our stats bear out that it's had an impact on EV ownership in regional Queensland in particular. So, and I won't bore you with the rest, but we do have a metering business and a telecommunications business, and when you think about the energy transition and what we need to do as a sector, it won't be done without metering, and it won't be done without telecommunications. The convergence of telecommunications and energy is already here, and as a business we're certainly very, very keen to make use of all of the collective assets and know-how of Energy Queensland to make sure that we're at the forefront of the energy transition with our partners, Queensland Events Corporation. So thank you very much for listening.